would like to introduce the panel to all of you. The focus of this panel is basically to discuss what do we do to convince policies and regulations to deploy large-scale, last mile access, which we discussed in the morning also. But just to keep on extending a little bit more, stretching ourselves, we have Gustaff Iskandar from Indonesia, and he works in many remote areas. He is quite famous for, erecting bamboo towers and so on and so forth, and working with indigenous communities. His case study can be looked at on CNX website. We have Isha Suri from Internet and Center for Internet and Society. She has done a lot of research on communities, how they are using internet, including some of our projects, I guess. We have John Garrity, but apparently he is not available. We have Dharmendra Singh. You heard him in the morning. Since in the morning he said about 2 centers per state, we are going to increase the number. That's why we have called him again on the stage to have his more commitments. We have Abhishek Raj. Thank you for joining. And we are going to start by asking my first question with Gustaff. Gustaff, you have been deploying and working on last mile access for a long time. Tell us 2 things. One is, do you think this model is scalable and sustainable on its community, or does it always require heavy funding? Because the reason I'm asking this question is because when we are proposing for policy or large scale deployment, we need to be very sure that we are just not doing one case study after the other, but it is something which is replicable as a meaningful connectivity or as an alternative but meaningful connectivity. So that's for you, Gustaff. And since Indonesia's many remote situation is not very different from the other Asian countries, your example or your suggestion would be widespread relevant. Thank you.
Actually, there is many things that we need to consider in terms of how we deploy community networks infrastructure in rural areas and remote places. But I think 2 main things that is important. Firstly, we need to critically reflect that in order to sustain community networks in rural areas and remote places, we need to take focus on capacity building for the local communities, because the brainware is one of the most important aspect in order to deploy software and hardware that are needed to develop the community network infrastructure. Secondly, there are no such thing as one policy fit for all, as community networks is somehow, I feel, is always contextual by nature. And in Indonesia, we have been witness how different geographical and topography, including people, culture, and tradition, can also involve and impact how the community networks can be developed and sustained properly. So I think from there, we also need to understand what kind of policy ecosystem that are navigated, how the telecommunication and internet services being developed in a local context. Because even in Indonesia, sometimes we have a problem with policy and regulations, not because the policy is not there, but because people doesn't have any knowledge about this existing policy. So they afraid that what they do is will not comply with the existing policy and regulations. And yeah, I think that can be our opening for the discussion. Actually, I want to learn more from your end how the community network practice and development has been developed so far, because I think we need as much as a study case that are relevant for the study, because I do believe there are a diversity of approaches and practice of community networks that are needed to be recognized.
Okay, so one of the things that what India has done in the last few years, in fact, what we did is at a policy level, as a scheme level, government adopted a scheme based on last mile connectivity, which is called PM Vani. That is pretty much almost like liberalization of licensing of internet. So you don't need license to have an internet or distribute an internet or to buy an internet. You can buy and distribute, and the model is also demonstrated here outside, just outside this door, because the only thing that was required is an authenticating, last mile authenticating officer or the person, or a device which can authenticate you that you are the right user or whatever user, but at least I know who is the user. And this PM Vani case study has been done by G20 through our model that we have adopted, and many places. Now, in terms of scale, I felt that, you know, this is certainly in the right direction, one effort where it allows to create more entrepreneur, more people to adopt internet, more people to create last mile hotspots, and so on and so forth. And with authentication, and you can charge also, because it clearly says that once you authenticate, you pay 10 rupees for a half an hour or 1 hour, and then you pay and you start working. And so, Isha, you have done some research and you have studied some of these things. I'm asking you this question is that, do you really think that community network has to be hard and fast model in itself, the way it is, that you do one point to multi-point, and it is strictly managed by community, strictly, you know, done with the involvement of the community and not as a service provider per se? Or do you think that PM Vani is a great model of liberalizing not only internet licensing, but liberalizing also community networks the way it is known, you know, in terms of providing last mile connectivity?
Sure. Thank you for the question. And in this, I would also like to spotlight some of the research that we've done, right, where this question of PM Vani specifically came. What we found during our research is that community networks per se does not have to be as rigid as you were talking about, but it is definitely an alternative and complementary approach to connectivity. It doesn't really have to be an either or. With PM Vani specifically, what we also experienced, and when we talked to a couple of stakeholders, one was that it is only successful where backhaul is already available. And the other thing that was there, that it requires an OTP authentication. So I do remember that one of the interviews that we did, and Abhishek can probably shed more light on it, but in one of the interviews, for instance, and you also mentioned early in the morning that there are a lot of villages that still live in telecom dark area, right? Like 35 to 49,000 villages that you sort of mentioned. Now, one stakeholder told us that the nearest point in the place that I currently live from this village to get an OTP is 20 kilometers away. So these are those barriers and friction. Having said that, PM Vani, not taking away anything away from the program or the scheme, it does reduce prices also significantly, but it's not going to be the anathema that we're looking for, or the silver bullet that one hopes that it will be when it comes to solving the connectivity conundrum that exists in India. Where infrastructure continues to be a challenge in a lot of those villages. You still don't have these telecom operators or TSPs, because they do not have significant return of investments, will not invest there. And that is where I still feel that CNs will be an important sort of model that one will need to rely on. Having said that, there are also challenges to that. And the challenges I feel is that after 2016, for example, the Telecom Regulatory Authority of India has not mentioned community networks, quote unquote, in any of their policy documents. That was the only sort of policy document that comes to my mind in India, which mentions how community networks are actually enabling last mile connectivity. Subsequent to that, we've had the National Telecom Policy, the National Digital Communication Policy in 2018, which has talked about bridging digital divide, but has not looked at CNs as an alternative model. And that to me is slightly concerning. In fact, as recently as August 2023, when they're talking about another sort of a licensing model, where they're talking about digital connectivity infrastructure providers, which are going to be a separate sort of licensing category under the UL regime, with very light touch sort of a regulatory mechanism. Even there, in that entire consultation paper, community networks does not find a mention. Even though, they've said that rural connectivity and all of those are objectives. And to me, that is slightly alarming and concerning, because it is a model in India that has shown to give a lot of success and has been a successful model of connectivity, especially when we talk about hitherto unconnected areas. And I do feel that it is important that the policy makers are aware of it and also acknowledge its success, because that is when you will have specific sort of policies in place for these sort of operators, which they need to really scale up, because we were talking about in the previous session about the levies that are imposed. If backhaul is not there, the only other option is to have an ISP category C license. Now, the minute you have an ISP category C license, you're also required to pay a percentage of your revenues as a licensing fee and USOF. And that becomes a huge component for these small scale operators. And they actually may be best served and may have the incentive to provide connectivity in those, the local operators, right? They have the incentive which the national operators do not have. And that is why I feel that you're correct. It doesn't have to be rigid. It doesn't have to be only a type of model. But I do feel it is an alternative and complementary model that needs to be recognized.
Actually, TRAI, when they had launched consultation paper much before PM Wani, but historically, if you see the PM Wani, when it became a policy, there was a historical link to a paper. They had mentioned DEF's example of community networks. Yeah.
That's the 2016 paper that I was talking about, the consultation paper.
Yeah.
After that, none of the subsequent documents sort of look at it as a model. And I think that's sort of alarming, because
so
after
that I'm not alarmed at all, because the reason is that when I had met Sharma, who actually wrote that consultation paper, personally wrote, he mentioned, because he was very impressed with community networks, the last mile Wi-Fi that we were doing. But I know that bureaucrats, when usually they write these kind of recommendation letter, they don't want to recognize anybody, and gradually they must have removed the names and all that, except the deployment example of Wi-Fi hotspot. So they actually consider Wi-Fi hotspot as a motive, not really the methodology as a motive. How do you do it and things like that. And that is how they done it. Just, but having said that, what is very interesting is that if you look at the entire history of internet, we are naturally relying that telecom only will solve this problem, which also means only the commercial company will solve this problem. Whereas, considering that internet is no more a technology and connectivity is no more just a telecom service, but it is a media service, it's a content service, it is everything like a road service or something. We haven't been growing like the way we have liberalized ourselves, that media is a fourth estate. Even though you are not subject to the paper you use and all that. Paper is an industry, but media is not. Similarly, technology may be industry, but technology usage media cannot be a technology industry, right? So similarly, what I'm actually trying to say is that we have developed community radio licensing, right? We have created many other ways of making means reach to the people. We created PM Pradhan Mantri Sadak Yojana, also liberalizing last mile physical access from the NHAI. National Highway Association of whatever, India. similarly, why we are not growing beyond telecom as a model to give a last mile access to us as a final frontier, and why it is not getting liberalized by them? I mean, I'm asking this question to you because you are in the middle of that business also, and the last mile access provider also, is that why we are not liberalizing ourselves from the clutches of the telecom service providers to take different kind of model, you know, to provide last mile access?
Difficult question. See, till the time, I'm not a expert on policy matters. I understand it limited to the satellite technology, which is relevant for our business. But see, till the time, you don't define connectivity as a essential service as a nation, right? Road is an essential service, right? Till the time you don't define that, then only limited project-based and area-based funding will flow in, right? And ultimately, to whether you are building roads, whether you are laying down the fibers, whether you are connecting satellite networks, if, for an example, if you're, we all understand that the hilly terrain of India, which is northeast, Leh, Ladakh, Jammu and Kashmir are unconnected, right? Till the time you don't come up with the solutions which are specific for those areas, and you keep bringing something which is very, very generic, this is not going to enable that, right? So first, that's the most important part. Having said that, whatever I have seen in last 6 months, maybe an year, the regulatory framework from the connectivity perspective, specifically for the satellite service, is becoming more and more open, right? You have seen that earlier, a satellite operator, it was mandated that satellite operator must come through ISRO and SIL, right? Now they said, okay, you can be an international company, you can be an Indian company, as long as you have an Indian entity and you can bill in INR, you can sell your services directly. And that is first, and I think very important thing which has enabled, right? Now, earlier it was ISRO launching satellites which were having limited capacity. And no large satellite operator was designing the capacity specifically for India, considering it was a closed market when you talked about the satellite communication, right? But now, with this openness, the capacity which has come by default over India, do you think Starlink has designed capacity for India? No, India was not in their mind. Do you think OneWeb has designed capacity or India was in their mind? No, it wasn't. Do you think Amazon Kuiper? No. But because they were building a global constellation, so by default, India got covered. So we are very lucky, very fortunate. Then even if the framework didn't allow, we have terabits of capacity coming over India. And now with this small change that they can, like recently you've heard like OneWeb getting its license like day before yesterday, right? Now they can offer service. Of course, Hughes is the local partner. We have exclusivity over OneWeb. But OneWeb or any other, for that matter, Starlink may acquire a license tomorrow, and they can start selling the service directly. And they will have terabits of capacity over India, right? So what happens? Till now, satellite capacity only businesses could afford. I'm not going into the prices. For an example, today, or say in next 6 months, capacity pricing will be 1/5 of what it was 6 months back. 1/5. Now suddenly what happens? It will open, a new prospect base will come in, right? Community network would be able to work directly without probably any funding or without probably any subsidies and get this capacity. However, it's not just the space segment. It's the technology, the hardware itself is probably an inhibitor today, when it comes to the equipment which needs to go to these communities. So the policy needs to be made where the capex for the communities is provided. However, OPEX needs to be self-sustainable, right? Which I think can be done by creating employment. I think we can have a very long discussion around that. But that's what I said in the morning. You need to involve communities. Till the time communities won't own the last mile infrastructure, somebody may pay for it. You will find actually the corporates saying that, okay, for long-term recurring revenue benefit perspective, I'll fund the equipment. But they cannot place people to make sure that equipment is safe, secure, and it's running maybe for 5 years, which could be a projected time frame to recover the capex cost, right? So there are many challenges around it.
So yeah, I mean, when you said that community have to get involved ultimately, grassroots level, PM Vani is one thing that clearly says that anybody and everybody can take. But I still don't know that suddenly it says that now the policy, telecom policy is liberalized, that NGOs can apply to become ISPs. You know what I mean? Or the cooperatives are allowed. I'm sure if they apply, they won't be rejected, because as long as you're paying the license fees or whatever they would be. But what I'm actually trying to see is that why we are unable to recognize this as an essential service. And I agree with your point, okay, as long as we are not treating it as an essential service, and the only state who have learned how to is Kerala. You know, so Kerala has created a separate company within the state, which is called Kerala Optic Fiber Network, KOFN, right? Who is Satish Babu is its CEO, and they have decided to go household in all those unconnected areas. They have a target. So they are saying that what BharatNet could have done or should have done, since they couldn't do, because maybe at a national level or federal level of working, we are actually trying to do it at a state level or a province level. Abhishek, do you have any kind of suggestion that how does it work in terms of creating micro business out of it, you know, creating nano business out of it, which is expected out of PM Vani, but I'm not seeing that speed.
So first of all, thanks for having me here. So before moving on to this question, I'll just jump in for the points that was raised on connectivity as an essential service. So that is one important thing to do to improve the connectivity. So if we go at the village level in India, so we have this Gram Panchayat development plan, which is formulated every 5 years. But in that plan, you see healthcare and everything, but you don't see connectivity. So if you kind of include connectivity in that Gram Panchayat development plan, it could provide some necessary capex to set up a community network. For PM Vani, yeah, it is a good step in right direction, but again, it is not picking up. So for finding out the reason, like being a researcher, I would have to do a research study for it, but primarily it is because of absence of backhaul in some cases, and also because telecom operators have like
Not giving the backhaul to the
yeah, precisely. So
just wanted to quickly, and this could be my skepticism as a researcher stepping in, when you said that, you know, why are we still relying on these telecom service providers, or why do you still think of DOT or TRI? You know, why hasn't it really trickled down even within our consciences that it's a liberalized sort of a world we're looking at? I think because telecom is not perceived, it's still not a liberalized sector. I still feel that in India, the bureaucracy still sits on it as a command and a control regime. And if you look at the most recent version of the telecommunications bill, which by all signs it could be tabled during the winter session, still looks at it. In fact, what they've done is they've expanded their sort of tenets, right? Where they've said that even over-the-top services will now also need to be licensed under the DOT. So what you're essentially seeing is not liberalization, but the opposite of it, from where we were in, say, the 1994. And I think that's why, at the end of the day, we all ultimately grapple with, but where is the policy or lack thereof? And our imaginations are also curbed with how much elbow room we have by virtue of the regulations in the space. And there are very restrictive regulations, be it a spectrum management sort of policies. We still don't want to look at administrative allocation of spectrum. The most recent version, again, of the bill, they do talk about probably spectrum sharing. It can be the preamble or the concept note will talk about for welfare purposes, but the act will stop short and say, but it still should still be by virtue of an auction. So I think when the government or the regulator has such a tight control, we will always look at it as something that we're at the mercy of by the government and never be able to imagine it as a liberalized sort of a space. And I think that is inherently a problem, that it is still a command and a control regime. When you need license to provide services, I think therein lies the dichotomy.
Gustav, what kind of learning do we have from Indonesia? Because I don't think Indonesia also has a deep penetration of internet, because you have how many thousands of islands? Perhaps you have more islands than number of people in many places, I think. Can you tell me, is there any, enlightening policies that your country is adopting or looking at or trying to find out?
Well, by far we have around 17,000 islands in Indonesia, and by 2020, based on the report made by government, there are around 12,000 remote villages that still doesn't have any proper internet connectivity, and some of it doesn't have any proper electric support. So in terms of basic infrastructure and connectivity, we still have quite serious challenges. Even though that the internet penetration in Indonesia is, I think, in the past few years, is extremely increased. Based on the report made by the National Association of Internet Service Provider, we have already around 73% of whole population in Indonesia have internet access. But of course, it's not include people in remote areas and rural places. And historically speaking, I think the internet development in Indonesia is basically rely on community networks, because at that time, I still remember around mid-90s when internet started to appear, all the connectivity in different towns and city is made by a community that are based on campus and university. And that is how internet penetration started to develop in Indonesia. But of course, when corporations and big companies started to take over the whole businesses, and they, together with government, there are several policy and regulations that are limiting the participations and engagements of people. This, I think, become a new obstacle. Even though that we can understand that the internet and telecommunication service is a highly regulated sector in Indonesia, because there are quite a lot of people who have an interest and rely on this infrastructure. At least we have 5 pillars of policy and ecosystem in Indonesia that regulate and navigate how the telecommunication infrastructure is built, how the technical standardization is happening, including the application standard, the content policy, as well as business policy and regulation. That quite a lot for community networks development in rural areas and remote places, especially for people who don't know anything about policy, regulations, and technical stuff and so on. It can be very challenging and confusing. Of course, we need more open and flexible approach on this, and we try to advocate some of the approaches. Like, for example, I think in 2004, if I'm not mistaken, there is an interesting movement in Indonesia that liberate the use of 2.4 gigahertz frequency, which allow us to use wireless devices and doesn't need to pay for any licenses for that. And it, I think, stimulate a lot of community networks projects in Indonesia, including RT-RW-Net is like the collective approach on connectivity in rural areas and remote places. I think we adopted RT-RW-Net models. It was developed by Ono Purbo and other internet activists, I think around 10 to 20 years ago, and then it grew into many different approaches. But I think such open and flexibility is needed in order to increase engagement and participation of people. And I do believe that handing over power and knowledge to the people can benefit better and to have more decentralized approach on connectivity, because people can find their own models with their own that are suitable with their context and respective region, because with the diversity of geographical context, culture, and economic background, I think corporate approach on connectivity it will create a gap and disparities, because I do believe the centralized power is always have a limited outreach, in particular if we deal with people in remote areas and rural places.
Thanks, Gustav. There is one more, thought that came into my mind, and especially for you, Dharmendra, is that India has got this railtel, right? Rail goes to each and every nook and corner of the country, and we can still go with the railway line and see that this is carrying an optic fiber to this station, but people around this station are not well connected, right? Then we have BharatNet itself claims that it has got optic fiber reach to the panchayat. That means 250,000 panchayat it has taken the pipe to, and out of that it claims that 156 or 60,000 is service ready. Their service ready phrase is also, a question of its meaning into Wikipedia or anywhere, that what does it mean, service ready? It is always ready but non-functional, so kind of thing one can say. But what I'm saying is that infrastructural wise, we are there, and in the middle of all this, Geo is also one idea where they said that connectivity doesn't matter, data matters. I'm not even interested in monetizing my connectivity. I will monetize on the data. It is something like, I don't want to take toll tax on the road, because the peripheral business will bring enough money and I will provide the road service free, or something like that. And that may be the future when we talk about access will be available to you, because I am the data, and I am the product. So that's why pipe will come. But my question is that these infrastructure are close to my house, close to the institutions, close to the places. Why we are unable to convert that into last mile access? Because there is certainly some issue there. I don't know what it is. Is it because, like you also said, that we would like to go to the places where there is no connectivity, and that's where your service is, right? You don't want to compete with the market where already available. In fact, that yahan Airtel hai, I don't want to go there. But they are not providing service, or they are not being utilized to be providing service, or somebody doesn't know how to maintain and manage. Google had started one service with Railtel, but now even that one is not working. Whatever. So what is it that this last mile connectivity in an area perhaps which is not haves, but they are more have-nots, is not reaching?
See, there are 2 points here, right? One, we talked in the morning about meaningful connectivity, right? Another is no connectivity, right? So when you say we have RailTel, rail network goes through not really any ultra-rural, areas. It goes through suburban or maybe rural areas, right? And the fiber is laid, right? But then somebody need to erect a mast, use that fiber as a backhaul, and do the last mile distribution, right? And to the extent it is commercially viable, everybody has used that. Where it is not being used is where it is not commercially viable. That's one. Because erecting that mast and putting up radio access network can cost you $150,000. I'm giving you a ballpark figure where you'll put up a 35-meter mast and you'll put up radio which can cover like 10 kilometers, right? But how you recover that, that's one part, right? Second is area which is well covered, but service is not meaningful. I can tell you I come from a rural background. In my village, in my house, I get 1 bar, and my uncle's house, you get 5 bars. How do you ensure that every house gets right QoS? That again, the telcos kept acquiring subscribers, but haven't invested in the radio network in the same proportion, right? It's like, let's juice it out. And if I speak openly, then it started happening when all these guys were asked to pay certain penalties, right? So now then, anyways, let me not go there. Isha can talk more in details. We also suffered, but we are a small company, not to that extent, right? So one, provisioning enough resources in areas which already has backhaul. That's one question. That is, again, commercial viability. Second, you have backhaul, whether it is fiber or maybe satellite somewhere, but not enough infrastructure is built to do the last mile connectivity, to distribute that backhaul to the end users, right? Third is an area where actually there is no backhaul. And there are areas, I think I was reading one of the reports which you shared with me, which was December 2022, that 30% of villages in Northeast are unconnected, were unconnected. Say, imagine 20% are done, maybe still about 24,000 villages are unconnected, which have no kind of connectivity. So let's focus on that, right? So our focus as a company is to bring in enough capacity, bring in next generation technologies to ensure that there is no gap in supply. Supply is there. Now demand is also there, but we need to lay down that infrastructure to reach those users. And which is, how do you do last mile? I'll say there are 3 scenarios you want to do. There is a village where 10 to 25 people lives. In some hilltop, there are 5 houses. Do you think somebody will lay down a 50-kilometer fiber to reach them? Never. There is a small village where 100 people live, right? Will that happen? Maybe 3 years down the line. But can we wait 3 years and still let those people unconnected? And then areas where there are people, number of people, say in a valley, but very, distributed, maybe 10,000 people in probably 10 square kilometer area or more. What do you do there? So these are 3, different scenarios and which will be solved using different technologies. Backhaul can be made easily available using satellite technology, right? Last mile for small, communities, 10, 15, 20 people can be done easily. But now, today, government has given 4G, 5G license to 3 big players and 1 BSNL, right? Now, if I want to go and connect a society where, there are 50 houses in 10 square kilometer area, how do I do that? I cannot do that by putting up Wi-Fi access point, right? That will be too costly. I cannot even create a Wi-Mesh network. The best way to do it, probably do a captive LTE or captive 5G, right? But I don't have a license. A village will not have a license. I'll have to go to Big 3 or BSNL to let me use that license, right? And put up the infrastructure. That happens. After that, that is not accessible till the time everybody has smartphones. So making sure smartphones are subsidized in those areas, right? Making sure communities are granted free access to 5G license for captive LTE network, community Wi-Fi networks, right? So I think these are some of the, I had a discussion with DOT, I had a discussion with BSNL. Thankfully, they are very forthcoming that as far as you are rolling out a site under BharatNet project, whether it is 1, 2, or 3, we are happy to extend that 4G license, right? For a captive 4G network, right? Or you can say community 4G network. There are different, nowadays, BSNL and DOT is talking about captive networks. Since one of the big guy has got the license under in the name of captive 5G license, right? So I think these are areas which needs to be plugged, and they're all doable. And again, I'll say it cannot happen till the time you enable, empower local communities to take care of the infrastructure. These are very far areas. No corporate or government will be able to manage and ensure that once the infrastructure is put, it is working. Purely because I live in that community. My house is in dark. You put a solar panel to run a VSAT. In the night, I'll steal that and run a bulb at my house because I don't care about the connectivity. What I care is that bulb, if I can light up that bulb in my house. So it's a difficult situation, but I think solutions are there. It's that few people need to come together, put up a solution, and all stakeholders need to own something. And community also. Again, I'm saying Sylvia in the morning said, nobody else will help till you don't want to help yourself. And that's where I'll rest my case, Isha.
So looks like the next CNX we will have to have 1,000 communities coming. हमारी मांगे पूरी करो, हमारे घर में इंटरनेट लाओ, नहीं तो हम खाना नहीं खाएंगे, भूख हड़ताल पे जाएंगे, that kind of thing. Because the reason is that there are 400 million people work in NREGA, right? I mean, apply for, not all of them work, but they apply, potentially they apply. Now all of them are being asked to mark attendance through online, an app. And you yourself in the data shows that connectivity doesn't work in that area where they are digging the hole, or doing the labor work. And affordability is another issue, So, I mean, we are actually really don't know what kind of policy are we making, what kind of infrastructure exists. And so I'll ask Isha, and then after that we will wind up with last comments from each one of us. Do you really think that we are poised to come in a situation where we will have to create a mass movement or something like that?
I think that the problem is that there is lack of political will, and I'm going to stick my neck out and say it. And the reason that is there is because we all love these ideas of India being the second largest market, internet base in the world. We've not really gone and sat down and thought, what does that really mean when we say that you have 850 million subscribers? What sort of connectivity are we talking about? And when we say and meaningful connectivity is important because a survey, for instance, showed post-COVID, a survey carried out by Learn Asia in collaboration with Dikri, that only 20% of school-going children in India had access to education during those times, right? But we talk as if we are all digital, and therefore everything else has to be digitized. You talk about registration on the eShram portal. We talk about digital public infrastructures, but no one really questions who are these public infrastructures being built for, and are they really public, quote unquote? Because if they are, then access to that infrastructure should be my point of conversation. My biggest problem probably is that there is dissonance. There is dissonance because we've all bought into this story about India being this digital behemoth, and our conversations begin from there. And to be fair, I think the blame lies both with the regulator, but also with the providers, because they haven't invested in the infrastructure. We had the incumbents before 2016, but post 2016, they were engaged in this bottomless price war, and they have themselves to blame when they say we do not have enough money or resources. Having said that, none of these private entities are going to invest in rural infrastructure. I don't think they're going to do that. They'll keep talking about how it's doubly expensive. The return on investment doesn't make a solid case for us, and it is definitely the onus is on the government, because access to internet is a basic human right. You rely on it for the basic services, your education, health, the registration, eShram portal, I mean, all of these things. So I think the problem is that I personally feel that there is lack of political will, and that lack of political will is also because there isn't enough conversation happening about all of these things. There isn't enough discourse about all of these things. We all buy into the story about how we are the second largest internet base, how everything is good, we are the lowest data market in the world. But nobody says that only 3% of that subscriber base is actually wired broadband subscriber. So I do feel that unless and until we just talk more about these issues and there is pressure from the bottom up, I don't see anything moving, because definitely the conversations are about how we are on this digital journey. We've solved the problems that existed with the infrastructure, say, a decade ago. It's all hunky-dory. And therefore, we are on this next step of adoption and usage constraints. And no one is talking about those that are invisible in these conversations. And I think it is time that those invisible stakeholders are mainstream, because only then will we even meet any of our development goals. It's not going to happen otherwise.
So Abhishek, what kind of suggestion you have for what kind of policy we need as a researcher and from, the data collector, I would say, from the ground?
So any policy for connectivity, especially in the rural areas, has to understand the peculiarities of the rural market. Like on the demand side, we have limited skills, we have limited ownership of devices, and then on the supply side, we have lack of interest of operators due to a lower ROI. So any policy has to take these into account, because even if you subsidize the capex, like it happened for many areas in the northeastern region through various policies, say CTDP, which is Comprehensive Telecom Development Plan, but again, that towers are ultimately shut down because of not considering this fact. So we will have to be careful about the sustainability of the connectivity that we do. Again, one thing that you mentioned in the beginning, whether we should create a model for community network. So based on my research and based on what I feel is, every community network is unique in itself. So we don't have to create a model for that, but let that be specific to the geography, to the socioeconomic conditions that is there. So yeah, this is my thoughts.
Gustaff, do you think that from ITU's perspective, from the global various best practices perspective, the onus is on community to take the ownership of having their own network, or do you think that we still need some policy change, and what could be those policy suggestions quickly in a couple of minutes?
Well, I would like to amplify what Isha mentioned about the political interest. I think the absence of political interest in order to provide equal and connectivity in rural areas and remote places, I think this is our big problem. Not only in Indonesia, not only in India, but probably also in many other places in the world. And the business model is also a problem. I think everything is centralized and controlled by the market demand and corporation and so on. And I think one of the interesting case that we have been studying in Indonesia is that when you transfer the knowledge and increase the capacity of people in rural areas to build their own infrastructure and the connectivity is there, there are more advantage and important development. There are new job creations, new businesses happen, new opportunity for people in rural areas started to create, and so on and so on. So this kind of story and things that happens in the ground, I think we need to amplify and share as much as possible this story to others in order to inspire and to create a movement on community networks, in particular to rural areas and remote places. And in Indonesia, currently our government is also focused to improve the quality of services as well as the internet outreach. And I think that will be impossible without any community engagement. Either corporations, private sector, or business units that provide internet connectivity will fail if they only think about the business as usual approach. We need people-centered approach on this, and we have some witness and experience on how we done this in Indonesia. There are also interesting stories in other countries in Asia Pacific that I think we need to collect as much as experience and story on how community network can improve and address digital divide challenges in many different parts of the world.
So wonderful. Unless anybody want to contribute, I would like to wind up. Dharmendra, do you want to say a few words?
I think same thing I said in the morning, that any of you working in any of the states looking to put together a model which can work for your community, right? Please reach out to us and we'll be happy to contribute whatever is in our control. That's what I can say. You know, my colleague Jairam is here. Some of you have interacted with him, and my contact details, if you don't have, you can take from Osama. And of course, anything we'll do together along with DEF, right? So happy to help.
Okay, so we will finish there, but before that I just want to make a consolidated statement that I feel that we don't really need a extraordinary policy to do a last mile connectivity, but we certainly need a policy of making last mile connectivity or the connectivity or access as human rights and basic requirement as a fundamental or infrastructural requirement. Till the time that is provided, we cannot make any other policy digital exclusive. That is what I feel that we must push on, because we cannot make a policy that you can do this work only through connectivity and you don't have a connectivity, right? And that is the reason why most of the people have started suffering. The poor people are suffering, you know. When you say that you have to upload this, you have to download this, you have to give this, you have to make a payment like this is the only way, there is no other way, you know, and then it become exclusionary. Is my, I mean, I would say a suggestion to the policy makers and to all of us is that I don't think we need an extraordinary policy for providing last mile access. It is in the hands of many other companies and associations and organizations and governments and community, of course, the more you demand, and the paying capacity, of course, and the managing capacity. But certainly it's a matter of human rights complaint that if you say that this is the only way, my way is highway, is the only way, is not something that one can think of. Because we still haven't reached. You cannot have a 42% people connected and you make connectivity is necessity. You know, I mean, because more than half the population, even Indonesia, I just checked, only 62% internet penetration is here, only 62%. I mean, 48% is a lot of 38% is a lot of population, you know, and all those people are, and human right philosophy is that even one person is deprived is a violation, you know. So that's the only thing that I would like to end this note, is that we need to work on the exclusionary policy rather than we need any inclusionary policy.